My husband's white moonlight killed someone that day, and he personally pressed my fingerprints onto the murder weapon. Penelope is in poor health and can't bear imprisonment. You take the fall for her." I smiled and wiped away my tears. "Okay, who told me to love you?" On the day of the trial, I submitted evidence of his company evading $10 billion in taxes. As the police led him away, I whispered, "Forgot to tell you, the deceased was personally switched out by me. Your white moonlight has long been lying on the forensic pathologist's dissection table." The cold smell of alcohol mixed with an unfamiliar perfume violently flooded Vivian's nostrils as she sat silently in the darkness for a full 3 hours. Outside the door were Alistair and his beloved Penelope. More precisely, Alistair was half supporting Penelope, almost holding her entirely in his arms, as he staggered in. "Alistair. Brother Alistair. I'm so scared." Penelope's voice was filled with sobs, so soft and sweet that it could drip water, and her body trembled uncontrollably as she clung tightly to Alistair. "Don't be afraid, Penelope, it's okay, I'm here." Alistair's voice was filled with a tenderness and care that Vivian had never heard before, with an almost coaxing patience. He didn't even think about turning on the light, perhaps because in his subconscious, the existence of the villa's mistress was completely irrelevant. In the darkness, Vivian's fingertips dug deeply into her palms, leaving several crescent-shaped bloody marks, but she felt no pain at all. What hurt even more was the dull ache coming from her heart, which had long been numb. She was already used to such scenes in their 3-year marriage, wasn't she? The rustling sound of clothing rubbing together, accompanied by the woman's suppressed sobs and the man's low comforting words, continued for a while in the entryway. Then Alistair helped Penelope upstairs, and the sound of their footsteps disappeared in the direction of the master bedroom. The bedroom she shared with Alistair, although Alistair almost never set foot in it. Vivian sat on the sofa in the living room like a ghost for a long time, so long that the moonlight outside the window shifted, casting cold patches of light on the floor. Only when there was absolutely no more movement upstairs did she slowly get up, without turning on the light, and headed towards the kitchen in the faint light, wanting to pour herself a glass of water. Just as her fingertips touched the cold glass of the glass, rapid footsteps came from the stairs. Alistair came down, carrying with him the lingering smell of alcohol and Penelope's sweet perfume. He walked straight towards Vivian, without any embarrassment or guilt about being caught, only an almost cold calmness, and a hint of barely perceptible anxiety. "Vivian, let's talk." His voice was exceptionally clear and exceptionally cold in the quiet night. Vivian held the water glass, not turning around, but looking at the thick darkness outside the window. "Talk about what?" "Talk about how you brought another woman back to our home into our bedroom." Alistair frowned, seeming annoyed by her lack of understanding. "Penelope is very emotionally unstable tonight. She needs to rest." "So my emotions, my needs, deserve to be trampled on?" Vivian turned around and looked directly at him. In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression. She could only see a tall but distant outline. Alistair was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing something, and finally he made up his mind. "Not just rest. Vivian, I need you to do Penelope a favor." "A favor." Vivian almost laughed, her voice trembling. "Alistair, can you be any more shameless?" Alistair ignored her sarcasm and took a step forward, taking something out of his suit pocket. The floor lamp in the corner of the living room suddenly lit up, probably turned on by Alistair just now. The sudden light made Vivian squint. Then she saw what Alistair was holding, a dagger, with a unique style. The handle seemed to be engraved with intricate patterns, but at the moment, it was covered in dark red, semi-congealed blood, and some had even splattered on his well-defined fingers. A strong smell of blood instantly filled the air. Vivian's stomach churned, and a terrible guess seized her as she stared at the knife. "Killed someone." Her voice was dry and unlike her own. Alistair's face was expressionless, as if stating something ordinary. "An accident. The other party wanted to assault her. Penelope was just defending herself, and it got out of hand." "Self-defense? Out of hand?" Vivian looked at the bloodstains, which were clearly caused by repeated stabs, and her heart turned cold. "So," she heard her hollow voice. Alistair held the dagger out further, almost touching her pajamas. "Hold it. Put your fingerprints clearly on it." Vivian took a step back abruptly, her back hitting the cold counter with a dull thud. What did you say? I said, put your fingerprints on it. Alistair's tone became one of unquestionable command, with a hint of impatience. Penelope is in poor health, she has serious heart disease and depression, she can't stand a single day in a place like prison. You'll be fine, I'll hire the best lawyers for you, at most it'll be self-defense, a few years and you'll be out. A few years? Vivian seemed to have heard the most absurd joke in the world, but tears uncontrollably welled up in her eyes. Alistair, I'm your wife. Your legal, registered wife. You want me to take the blame for your lover's murder? What else? Alistair's eyes were as cold as ice, without the slightest warmth. Vivian, ask yourself honestly, in the past 3 years, what have you eaten, worn, and used that wasn't given to you by the Alistair family? Your father's small company that was about to go bankrupt, who saved it with their investment. Now Alistair Corporation is trying to win the key plot of land in the east of the city, and there can't be any negative news. Penelope can't have anything happen to her either. It's only right that you contribute something to the Alistair family, isn't it? Contribute something? Vivian repeated these words, tears finally falling, scaldingly flowing down her cold cheeks. Contribute my freedom? My life? Or my life? I won't let you die. Alistair roared, grabbing her wrist, with so much force that he almost crushed her bones. It's just a few years in jail. When you get out, the position of Mrs. Alistair will still be yours. Be obedient. Be obedient? Vivian looked at him, at this man she had loved for 5 years and married for 3. His eyebrows and eyes were still handsome enough to captivate, but at this moment, those eyes that once made her drown only contained naked exploitation and undisguised cruelty. She struggled, trying with all her strength to get rid of him. Let go of me. Alistair, you're crazy. I won't sign. I will never take the blame for her. Her resistance infuriated him. Alistair's eyes sharpened, and his other hand rose without hesitation. A crisp slapping sound rang out in the silent kitchen. Vivian was slapped, her head turned to the side, her ears ringing, and a clear fingerprint quickly appeared on her cheek, burning with pain. This slap completely shattered the last faint illusion in her heart. Taking advantage of the moment when she was stunned by the slap, Alistair rudely pried open her fingers one by one, and pressed her fingerprints firmly and forcefully onto the sticky, cold, death-reeking hilt of the dagger. That feeling, cold and slippery, like the tongue of a poisonous snake, licked her skin, straight to the bone marrow. She no longer struggled. Like a rag doll that had been drained of its soul, she let him manipulate her, until he was sure that her fingerprints had clearly and completely covered the traces that might have existed originally. He disgustedly threw her hand away. Vivian staggered and barely stood up, supporting herself on the counter. She lowered her head, and her long hair fell, covering her expression at the moment. After a long while, as Alistair was about to leave with the murder weapon, she suddenly let out a very light laugh. The laughter was low and hoarse, with a hint of eerie calmness. Alistair paused and frowned at her. Vivian slowly raised her head, her face still stained with tears, the red and swollen fingerprints clearly visible, but the corners of her mouth tugged into an extremely strange arc. She reached out and slowly wiped away the tears on her face, her movements slow and mechanical. Okay, she said, her voice as light as a breeze, but with a determined meaning. I'll take the blame for her. Alistair seemed somewhat surprised by her sudden obedience, but mostly relieved. His tone softened slightly with a hint of condescension. That's right. Vivian, rest assured I won't mistreat you. The lawyer will see you tomorrow and tell you what to say. Vivian didn't respond to his words, just looked at him, her eyes once filled with love, now as deep as a bottomless ancient well. She repeated, as if swearing to herself, or cursing him. Who told me to? Love you. After Alistair left, Vivian stood there for a long time, until the sky outside the window turned a sliver of fishbelly white. She slowly moved her stiff body. She walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and the cold water washed over the fingers that Alistair had forced onto the murder weapon. She scrubbed them again and again, her skin red and almost broken, but she still felt the bloody smell and cold touch clinging to her bones, impossible to shake off. She raised her head and looked at the woman in the mirror, pale, empty-eyed, with swollen cheeks. Suddenly, She twitched the corners of her lips, revealing an extremely cold, even slightly manic smile. Alistair, you will never know what kind of dead end you have personally paved for your beloved Penelope. In the following days, everything was calm. Alistair had indeed used the Alistair family's power to suppress the news of Penelope accidentally killing someone. The police received a report and found that the deceased was an influential underground money lender with complex social connections, making the investigation difficult. And Vivian behaved unusually cooperatively. The lawyer Alistair brought, surnamed Zhang, was a top figure in Alistair Group's legal department, specializing in handling all kinds of tricky lawsuits. He meticulously instructed Vivian on how to describe the incident, how to describe the underground moneylender trying to molest her, how she panicked and grabbed a dagger on the table in self-defense, and how she accidentally stabbed him to death. Vivian listened quietly, nodding from time to time, even asking a detail or two to make the whole story sound more true and credible. Her calmness and understanding of the big picture surprised lawyer Davies, who privately told Alistair, President Alistair, Mrs. Alistair. She's very sensible. Alistair just assumed she had resigned herself to fate, or as she said, was willing to sacrifice herself because she loved him. He might have felt a faint pang of guilt, but it was quickly overwhelmed by his concern for Penelope and the ease with which his goal was about to be achieved. He promised to give Vivian's parents a large sum of money to ensure they would have no worries for the rest of their lives, as if buying out their daughter's freedom for a few years. He didn't notice that the look in Vivian's eyes was no longer one of humble love and painful struggle, but a calmness and mockery akin to a hunter's. During this time, Penelope lived in the guest room of the villa, carefully protected by Alistair. She occasionally encountered Vivian in the dining room, always looking frail and pitiful, but with a hint of smugness and provocation in her eyes. Vivian never responded. She just ate in silence, returned in silence to her room where she was essentially under house arrest, and prepared everything in silence. She needed a computer and a phone that Alistair wouldn't monitor. The opportunity came quickly. Alistair thought she had completely surrendered and relaxed his surveillance of her. One day, when the family doctor came to examine the frightened Penelope, Vivian excused herself by saying she felt tightness in her chest and needed some sedative medication, successfully sending the nanny downstairs to get it. Taking advantage of those brief minutes, she sneaked into Alistair's study and used a pre-prepared micro-device to quickly copy several key files from the encrypted partition of his computer. At the same time, she hid an unregistered SIM card in the lining of her underwear. Her movements were practiced, her heartbeat steady. Back in her room, she locked the door. She took out the SIM card and inserted it into an old spare phone. She turned it on and connected to the internet. She opened an encrypted chat app and found a contact marked C. Her fingers quickly tapped on the screen. The fish is hooked. Prepare to cast the net. The other party quickly replied. Is the evidence complete? Vivian's fingertip hovered over the screen for a moment, then landed heavily. Complete. Enough to make sure he never recovers. Be careful yourself. Don't worry. The stage is set, waiting for the protagonist to appear. Putting down the phone, Vivian walked to the window, looking at the roses blooming in the garden, Penelope's favorite flower, which Alistair had ordered to be planted everywhere. The corners of her mouth curved into an icy, bone-chilling smile. The trial date came quickly. This Alistair Group CEO's wife negligently causing death case, although the Alistair family tried their best to suppress it, still attracted great attention from the media and the public because it involved secrets of wealthy families and violent plots. Outside the courthouse, cameras and microphones were packed like sardines. Vivian was wearing a simple dress, her face pale, and she walked into the courtroom with her head lowered, escorted by lawyer Davies and bailiffs. She looked fragile and frightened, perfectly fitting the image of a woman horrified after accidentally killing someone. Alistair also came, sitting in the front row of the gallery. He was wearing an expensive custom suit, his face cold, his aura powerful. His eyes met Vivian's for a moment, carrying a warning, and a hint of implying that she should perform well. Penelope, however, did not appear, presumably carefully hidden by Alistair in a safe place to recuperate. Vivian lowered her eyes, hiding the sarcasm that flashed in her eyes. The trial proceeded as planned. The prosecutor presented the case, presenting evidence, including the dagger used as a weapon, and Vivian's clear fingerprints on it. Lawyer Davies stood up and began to defend Vivian on the grounds of excessive self-defense. He spoke eloquently, desperately exaggerating the urgency of the situation at the time, depicting how Vivian, as a weak woman, was forced to defend herself when she was assaulted, and accidentally killed someone in a moment of emotional excitement, which was excusable. The judge and jury members listened with different expressions. Alastair nodded slightly, seemingly quite satisfied with Lawyer Davies's performance. It was Vivian's turn to speak. All eyes were focused on her. She slowly stood up, her steps appearing somewhat unsteady, as if she were bearing enormous pressure. She raised her head, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, finally landing on Alastair's face. Alastair looked at her, his brow furrowing imperceptibly. For some reason, a faint sense of unease rose in his heart. Today's Vivian, although still looking weak, had eyes that were too calm, strangely calm. Vivian opened her mouth, her voice not loud, but clearly reaching every corner of the courtroom. Your Honor, members of the jury, regarding this case, I have some key information that I need to add. Lawyer Davies was stunned. This step was not in the prepared script. He subconsciously looked at Alastair. Alastair's eyes suddenly sharpened, staring intently at Vivian. Vivian, however, didn't look at them, and directly took out a thick file bag, sealed with a waterproof bag, from an old canvas bag she was carrying with her. She had insisted on bringing it in, and Alastair had thought she just wanted to bring some personal items for comfort and didn't care. I want to report, Vivian's voice suddenly rose, with a desperate determination. To report my husband, Alastair Group CEO Alastair, who since 5 years ago has systematically and organizationally evaded national taxes through related party transactions, false invoices, forged contracts, and overseas money laundering, involving a cumulative amount of. She paused, her gaze like an icy arrow, shooting straight at Alastair, whose face had changed drastically, and reported the astronomical figure word by word. Over 10 billion RMB. Here are some key account details, proof of funds flow, and screenshots of his emails with overseas shell companies. The entire courtroom exploded. Reporters, like sharks smelling blood, frantically pressed their shutters, all lenses focused on the ashen-faced Alastair, and the seemingly fragile woman who had dropped a bombshell. Nonsense. Vivian. You're crazy. Do you know what you're saying? Alastair abruptly stood up, veins bulging on his forehead, no longer able to maintain his usual composure. He tried to rush forward, but was firmly restrained by the bailiffs. Lawyer Davies was completely dumbfounded, his mouth agape, unable to speak for a long time. The judge banged the gavel forcefully. Silence. Silence. Plaintiff, are you aware of what you are saying and what the evidence you have submitted implies? I am very clear, Your Honor. Vivian straightened her spine. The woman who appeared meek and submissive in the villa had vanished. Now she was like a wind-battered, poisoned manjasaka flower, radiating a cold and deadly aura. I am willing to bear all legal responsibility for everything I have said. She turned to Alastair, looking at his handsome face contorted by shock, anger, and disbelief, and slowly, a smile appeared. That smile, cold, cruel, carried a long-suppressed hatred, finally finding release in delight. Alastair, I forgot to tell you. Her voice was not loud but like an icy awl, precisely piercing Alastair's eardrums. The deceased you made me take the blame for, I personally switched out. Alastair's pupils contracted sharply, as if he hadn't heard clearly, or rather, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. Vivian admired the shattered expression on his face, slowly and deliberately, in an almost sing-song tone, adding the final sentence. Your white moonlight, the Penelope you desperately wanted to protect. She leaned forward slightly, her red lips parted, uttering a devilish whisper. Has long been lying on the forensic pathologist's table. You personally pressed my fingerprints onto the murder weapon that killed her. Alastair felt like a thunderbolt had exploded in his mind, and the whole world spun. He stared fixedly at Vivian, the wife he had never looked at properly, the docile and humble woman who, in his eyes now, had become a vengeful ghost crawling out of hell. What did she say? Penelope was dead. Dead. At his hands? He personally put the weapon that killed Penelope into Vivian's hands. and personally helped her complete the frame-up? The immense absurdity and icy fear, like countless venomous snakes, instantly tightened around his heart, almost suffocating him. No. Impossible. You're lying. Vivian. You venomous woman. You're lying. He roared out of control, losing all composure, trying to pounce on her but was held down even more forcefully by the bailiffs. Just then, the courtroom doors were pushed open. Several staff members from the procuratorate and police officers in uniform walked in with serious expressions, heading straight for Alistair. Mr. Alistair, we have received a real name accusation and verified some of the evidence. We are now legally arresting you on suspicion of massive tax evasion, commercial fraud, and other crimes. This is the arrest warrant. The glaring arrest warrant was presented before Alistair. Handcuffs, with a click, coldly clamped onto the wrists that had once elegantly pressed Vivian's fingerprints. Alistair seemed to have been drained of all strength, looking incredulously at the silver shackles on his wrists, then suddenly looked up and stared fixedly at Vivian. Vivian stood there, calmly meeting his gaze across the noisy and chaotic crowd. Her eyes were calm and unwavering, only a bottomless, icy darkness. As if to say, "Look, this is the ending you deserve." The sunlight from outside streamed in through the high windows, casting a long shadow behind her, like a victor's cloak. This drama, which opened with betrayal and conspiracy, finally came to a tragic end under her carefully laid plans. And for Alistair, the trial of the law, and that endless hellish torment, had only just begun. The chaos within the courtroom was like a huge stone thrown into stagnant water, causing tumultuous waves that were difficult to calm. The reporters' flashes were almost about to imprint every desperate, ferocious moment on Alistair's face. He was firmly held by two bailiffs, the cold metallic touch of the handcuffs constantly reminding him. He was finished. Vivian. Bitch. You schemed against me. Alistair's eyes were tearing apart, struggling like a trapped beast, roaring unwillingly. Penelope. Where exactly is Penelope? Explain it clearly. Vivian simply stood there quietly, as if all the surrounding noise had nothing to do with her. She looked at this man who had once been high above, seeing her as insignificant as an ant, now fallen into the dust, trapped in the net he himself had woven. And in her heart, there was only a cold wasteland, and a hollow delight after revenge. Mr. Alistair, please remain calm and cooperate with our work. The chief prosecutor's expression was stern, his voice without any emotion, instructing the police officers to take him out of the courtroom. Alistair was forcibly dragged away, twisting his head desperately, his eyes bloodshot, fixed on Vivian. That gaze was filled with bone-gnawing hatred and incomprehensible madness. I won't let you go. Vivian. I'll haunt you even as a ghost. And Penelope. Give me back Penelope. His roar echoed in the courtroom corridor, fading away, finally cut off by the heavy closing of the door. The trial was forced to adjourn. The judge banged the gavel, announcing a recess and rescheduling the trial for Vivian's homicide case. But at this moment, everyone's attention had already been drawn to Alistair's shocking crimes and Vivian's last earth-shattering whisper. Vivian, escorted by the bailiffs, walked towards the temporary detention room. Her back was straight, her step steady, completely different from the panicked and weak Mrs. Alistair who had arrived earlier. Lawyer Davies stood there with an ashen face, the documents in his hands scattered all over the floor. He was finished. His career, and perhaps even himself, would face investigation for being deeply involved in Alistair's crimes. City Public Security Bureau, Major Crime Squad Interrogation Room. The cold light of the fluorescent lamp shone on Vivian's face, her expression calm and unwavering. Opposite her sat two experienced criminal investigators, Detective Morgan and Detective Reed. Detective Morgan's eyes were sharp as an eagle, trying to find a breakthrough from Vivian's subtle changes in expression. Detective Reed was responsible for recording, his brow furrowed, obviously shocked by the complexity of the case. Vivian, you said in court just now that the deceased was switched out by you, and Penelope is already dead and lying on the forensic pathologist's table. Please explain the situation in detail. Detective Morgan got straight to the point, his voice steady. Vivian raised her eyes clear but bottomless. Officer, I need confirmation that my report, regarding Alistair's tax evasion, has already been investigated. This is completely different from your current case. Detective Reed couldn't help but interject. Detective Morgan raised a hand to stop Detective Reed, looking at Vivian. I can clearly tell you that based on the evidence you provided, Alistair has been formally arrested and the relevant investigation has been launched. Now please cooperate with us and tell us the truth about the homicide. Vivian nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied with the answer. She took a deep breath and began to narrate, her voice as calm as if she were telling a story that had nothing to do with her. That night, Alistair brought Penelope back, and I heard their conversation. Penelope accidentally killed the underground banker. She was very scared. Alistair comforted her, then came downstairs to find me and force me to take the blame. He hit you. Detective Morgan noticed the faint finger marks on her face that had already faded, but were still distinguishable upon closer inspection. Yes. Vivian touched her cheek, a mocking smile curling her lips. He personally put the bloodstained dagger in my hand, forcing me to put my fingerprints on it. He said that Penelope's health was not good and she couldn't bear imprisonment, and I, as his wife, should sacrifice for him, for the Alistair family. Her tone was calm, but it sent a chill down the two detectives' spines. What a cruel and ruthless man. And then? How did you manage the switch? I agreed, Vivian said. I acted obedient and resigned. Alistair relaxed his vigilance. He put Penelope in the guest room on the second floor, and sent people to guard outside the villa, but he didn't watch me too closely. He knew I had nowhere to go. My family needed to rely on the Alistair family to survive. That night, around 3 in the morning, I made an excuse to go to the kitchen to pour water. In reality, I went to Penelope's room. Detective Reed's pen paused, and he looked up. She wasn't asleep, or rather, she was startled awake by my arrival. Vivian's eyes drifted into the distance, as if returning to that decisive night. She was smug, thinking I had succumbed. She even hypocritically said sorry to me, saying that when her health improved, she would find a way to compensate me. Vivian scoffed. I walked to her bedside, looking at her pitiful face. I asked her, "What does it feel like to kill someone?" She was stunned for a moment, then became somewhat agitated, saying it wasn't her fault, that scum deserved to die. She said that Alistair Gidge would protect her, and I was only fit to be her scapegoat. And then, Vivian paused, her gaze refocused, becoming cold and sharp. I took out what I had prepared long ago. What was it? Detective Morgan held his breath. A very thin piano wire, Vivian gestured. And also a pair of gloves. The interrogation room was silent, with only the rustling sound of Detective Reed's pen scratching on the paper. She realized what was happening and tried to scream, but I didn't give her a chance. I strangled her from behind. She didn't struggle much. She was already weak and she had just experienced killing someone, so she was mentally and physically exhausted. The whole process was quick. Vivian lowered her eyes, looking at her slender but strong hands. After confirming her death, I wrapped her body in a rug and dragged her through the secret passage connecting my room to the storage room to the villa's basement cold storage. That passage was something I accidentally discovered during the renovation. Even Alistair didn't know about it. After that, I cleaned up the scene and restored her room to its original state. Then I contacted C. Who is C? Detective Morgan immediately seized the key point. A collaborator. Vivian did not reveal more. I asked him to find a way to switch Penelope's body with the underground banker's body. I don't know the specifics of how he did it, but he did it very well, flawlessly. The dead person, the police found, was wearing Penelope's clothes from that night, and had signs of a struggle and stab wounds caused by a dagger. Those wounds were recreated on her body based on Penelope's description and the characteristics of the murder weapon Alistair brought. Detective Morgan and Detective Reed exchanged glances, both seeing the shock in each other's eyes. This was not just a revenge. It was a precise and ruthless plan and execution. So, Alistair thought he was covering up your crime of killing the banker. But in reality, he was covering up your crime of killing Penelope? And the knife he made you put your fingerprints on really killed Penelope? Detective Morgan sorted out the chilling logic. That's right. Vivian nodded, a strange smile appearing on her face. He cooperated very well, didn't he? He personally selected the murder weapon for his beloved Bai Yueguang, and personally placed the blame of murderer on me, the wife he looked down upon. Except he got the wrong dead person. He thought he was protecting Penelope, keeping her away from the eye of the storm. But he didn't know that I, the one he desperately wanted to push out as a scapegoat, was the real storm, and the person he wanted to protect had already become a ghost under my knife, sent to the murder weapon by his own hand. Even Detective Morgan, with his rich experience and countless bizarre cases, felt a chill down his spine. This woman, using a scheme within a scheme, used Alistair's ruthlessness and Penelope's smugness to complete a perfect counterkill and frame-up. She not only avenged her cheating husband, but also personally disposed of the other woman, and allowed her husband to become an accomplice without knowing it. Why did you do this? Even if they wronged you, you could have chosen to divorce, collected evidence to report Alistair. Why did you have to kill? Vivian looked at Detective Reed, a hint of pity in her eyes, as if looking at a naive child. Divorce? Report him? And then what? Watch them fly away, living a happy life with Alistair's money? My father's company would go bankrupt immediately, and my parents would suffer miserably in their old age. And me, a woman abandoned by Alistair, who would care about me. I might not even know how I died. They took away not only my husband's love, but also my life, my dignity, everything. Her voice lowered, filled with a deep-seated hatred. Alistair thought he could buy out my freedom and future with money, and Penelope thought she could steal everything with her fragility and scheming. They were wrong. I want them to pay the price. The most painful price. Alistair will lose the power, wealth, and freedom he cares about most, and will forever live in the pain and regret of killing the person he loved most. And Penelope. Vivian smiled, a smile that was beautiful but deadly. She lost her life, and until her death, she thought she was the victor, not knowing that she had long become a pawn on my chessboard. All of this was destined from the moment I agreed to take the blame. On the other side, at the city detention center, Alistair was being held alone in a cell. He had lost his expensive suit, changed into a prison uniform, his hair was disheveled, and he sat on the hard bunk bed with empty eyes. Penelope. Penelope. He muttered to himself, his mind filled with Penelope's charming smile, and Vivian's last demonic whisper. You personally put my fingerprints on the murder weapon that killed her. Ah! He suddenly grabbed his head and let out a painful roar. The immense remorse, anger, and indescribable sense of absurdity almost tore him apart. He had always thought that Vivian was a weak and easily manipulated wife, but he never expected that she was the deepest and most vicious one. She not only ruined him, but also killed Penelope, and he had become an accomplice. He remembered how gently he had comforted Penelope, how ruthlessly he had forced Vivian, and how confidently he had arranged everything. Now it seemed that every step was under Vivian's guidance, leading to the abyss she had planned. Poisonous woman. Vivian. You poisonous woman. He banged his head against the cold wall, making dull thuds, trying to relieve the torment in his heart with physical pain. But no matter how crazy he was, he couldn't change the facts. Penelope was dead. Killed by him personally. His business empire was about to collapse. And he would be ruined, imprisoned, and possibly even face the death penalty. Penelope's smile. Poisonous woman. Vivian. You poisonous woman. He banged his head against the cold wall, making dull thuds, trying to relieve the torment in his heart with physical pain. But no matter how crazy he was, he couldn't change the facts. It's over. Everything is over. This realization filled him with more despair than death itself. Several days later, the case investigation made significant progress. Based on the clues provided by Vivian and the secret assistance of C, the police found the hidden body of the real Penelope. The forensic autopsy confirmed that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, consistent with homicide, and the ligature marks on the neck matched Vivian's description of piano wire. The body of the underground banker, previously thought to have been killed by Penelope, was also found in another hidden location. The cause of death was also stabbing with a sharp weapon, but the modus operandi differed from Vivian's description of self-defense, and the role of C in the case is under further investigation. The evidence against Alistair for tax evasion and commercial fraud was conclusive, The amounts were particularly large, and the circumstances were particularly serious. He will face the severe punishment of the law. Vivian was formally arrested on suspicion of intentional homicide. When the trial reconvened, she stood in the dock, her expression still calm. The court comprehensively considered her motive for killing, long-term mental oppression, her husband's betrayal and forcing her to take the blame, her surrender, voluntarily confessing to the police the facts of the murder that they had not yet grasped, and her significant meritorious performance, reporting Alastair's tax evasion of $10 billion, saving the country a huge economic loss. At the same time, the victim, Penelope, was clearly at fault. Ultimately, Vivian was sentenced to 15 years in prison. When the verdict was announced, Vivian closed her eyes. 15 years. Compared to the long sentence she might have faced for taking the blame, or compared to the despair that Alastair and Penelope had inflicted on her, this result seemed acceptable. She was led away from the courtroom by the bailiffs. As she passed the gallery, she saw her parents rushing in. Her mother was in tears, and her father seemed to have aged overnight, his eyes filled with pain, incomprehension, and a hint of complex pity. Vivian gave them a comforting, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, Mom, Dad. Your daughter can only use this method to end this nightmare and reclaim a little of the justice that belongs to her." She turned her head and no longer looked back at anything. The prison gates slowly closed behind her, isolating her from the outside world. Within the high walls was another kind of life. But for her, this was perhaps more like a refuge than that magnificent but icy villa. At least here, she no longer needed to pretend, no longer needed to endure, no longer needed to love someone who was not worth it. She used her own hands to personally end that marriage filled with deceit, betrayal, and exploitation, and sent those who had once trampled on her, one by one, into the abyss where they belonged. Sunlight shone through the iron bars, illuminating her calm face. This power play, which began with betrayal and ended with revenge, came to a close. And she, Vivian, was no longer anyone's appendage, nor was she anyone's substitute. She was the protagonist of her own story, and even if the road ahead was a long prison sentence, her soul had gained freedom in some sense.